think that open source software is certainly the enabler of nearly all technology that we see in the world today. And what we find though is that the closer that the software is to the end user, the less likely it is that it's open source. So there's only a few open source applications that have a user interface that the end user sees. Sakai, the project that I work on, is one of those. And honestly, it's one of the more challenging but more fun things to do, is to build a user interface that the users ask for things and then the open source community has to respond and build those things. And the interesting way that we do that in Sakai is that those users often have money. And so they'll pay the committers. So we have many committers that make a living helping write Sakai. And when there is an end user who themselves can't add the feature but they feel strongly about it, then they'll hire someone in the open source community. But the code goes to everybody. And so that's one of the bigger engines of productivity, is when users with enough money have a need that they pay the open source community to build. So it's not all free. It's not open. Very little open source is actually purely free. I think the future of open source will require some revenue, but that revenue can't come at the cost of the values of open source, meaning that you can't say, I'm going to put some money in and now I want to own it. If you're not putting money in and making everybody better, then that's wrong. And open source cannot take that kind of money. But when it can take money where it says, I want to invest in this and I want to make it better for everybody, and I don't want to have partial ownership because I gave you money. If you depend on the commercial vendors of educational technology, they don't care about developing countries, because by definition developing countries don't have enough money. And commercial vendors of educational technology only want to sell to those who have a lot of money. The cost of having a salesperson, the cost of all these things are very costly, and so as far as they're concerned, developing countries are something that they can afford to ignore. And if they come to a developing country, they only want the richest 5 customers in that whole country. They don't care about everybody else. Open source is different. Open source, sort of as a value, cares about everybody, cares about efficiency, cares about running on less expensive hardware. We in Sakai, we care about like letting you run your own server. The commercial marketplace in educational technology increasingly just says, sorry, you can't run the software yourself, you have to run it on our servers. But if you're far, far out and you're not you're not connected to the cloud, then you can't even make use of that technology. And so I think at some point what we need to do is we need to get more resources into open source so that we can gently, with good values, build the kind of software that's going to help. And so I've invested the past 15 years of my life to build software that can be used in developing countries. So if you go back to the early 2000s, everybody thought that what online education was going to do was to make them a lot of money. And what they found was that it actually cost more to teach one student online than it did on campus. And so that sort of was a bad decision. For like 10 years, from like 2001 to 2011, I think most online programs didn't make money and weren't very good. And so I'm fortunate that I was never part of one of those universities that had online programs like that, because I thought they were terrible. And with the MOOCs, what happened with the MOOCs is we basically said, we're not going to pretend that this is the same as non-campus education, but we're going to make it really cheap. As a matter of fact, we're going to give it away. At least in the beginning, they gave it away. And then in that experimental space, we actually learned that you could teach with different constraints. If you just say, I have to teach 100,000 students, what constraints will you have to deal with to teach 100,000 students? And once you've figured that out, you can actually teach 1,000 students. But before that, you could only teach 100 students, but now you can teach 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. Turns out once you teach 100,000, you can teach 1,000,000. And so it was a learning experience for us to figure out how to be successful as teachers in this much larger classroom space. Nothing inspired me. What happened is I found out about the MOOC revolution, and I thought it was at Stanford University, and I decided I would quit my job at the University of Michigan and go work at Stanford so I could join the MOOC revolution. And then when I started telling my boss that I was going to quit and go to Stanford just to be part of the MOOC revolution, they quietly told me that the University of Michigan was one of the 4 schools that was founding Coursera, and I didn't have to quit my job, and that I could be part of the MOOC revolution. And I'm not really joking, right? I was going to quit. I was going to leave my job. If my university was not going to do MOOCs, I was not going to work there. I ultimately believe that this is Netflix. This is the Netflix of the future. I don't quite know why there isn't a channel. I will tell you this, that you can get my class on Amazon Prime right now. I mean, when they first started thinking about this, they would say, why not hire an actor to teach a course? And I say, why not turn a teacher into a celebrity instead? In a way, it's good that this new online education is subject to a series of laws that say that you must make it accessible. And so that means that a university like the University of Michigan must build into whatever cost of producing the education to make it accessible. And so it's accessible at the beginning. But it's more than the law. The law for me means as a teacher I have access to financial resources that will help me make the course accessible, because I actually want the course to be accessible in the first place. And the reason is that if accessibility is done right, what you've done to help people who are blind or with other kinds of disabilities actually helps all students.